Good afternoon and welcome to From Burnout to Balance 5 HR Challenges to Not-Profit Status and Success. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Raleigh Merrill with GTM Payroll, HR, and Insurance Services. In a moment, I'll introduce to you our presenter, but first, feel free to use the questions functionality to ask questions during today's presentation. We'll get to as many questions as time permits at the end of the presentation. And if we don't get to your particular question, we'll be sure to follow up the next day. Just look for the little box towards the upper right there with the question mark, and you can type in your question. Also, you'll receive an email later today with a link to watch a video recording of today's presentation, as well as a PDF version of the slides from this webinar. Our presenter today is Jennifer Berry, a senior HR consultant with GTM and our HR practice leader. Jennifer brings more than 20 years of human resources experience to the GTM team, including managing and advising on the HR lifecycle for many organizations, including small to mid-sized not-for-profit organizations on up to and including larger global organizations. Jen's experience includes advising on mergers and acquisitions, HR project management, HR and benefits compliance, cybersecurity compliance, and more. She's led HR and process audits, ERISA audits, employee handbook projects, benefits administration platform development and deployment, and she's developed and delivered training on HR and benefits compliance. Jennifer's also consulted with clients in all areas of HR, including leave management, talent acquisition and terminations, benefits enrollment, compliance, and ACA, HIPAA, COBRA, and state and federal compliance notices. At this point, I'd like to turn things over to GTM's practice leader, HR practice leader, that is, Jennifer Berry.
Thank you very much, Raleigh, and thank you all for joining me today. During our discussion about the top challenges that nonprofit organizations face, we'll be reviewing the following and hopefully we'll complete these session objectives. We're going to talk about why HR is so important, especially in nonprofit organizations, the connection of HR with your organization's mission, the top challenges facing nonprofit organizations today, how HR creates culture in support of employee engagement, and the value of an HR strategic plan. So let's jump into our first topic, the importance of HR. First and foremost, the value of HR is often lost amongst other strategic priorities. HR tends to be more important in nonprofit organizations. It is so important because it tends to be the glue that keeps the organization running. Without HR, there are many parts of the organization that would not be able to function. Because HR is in charge of talent at most organizations, and due to trying to optimize the talent we recruit and hire to improve retention, it provides the workers needed to meet the organization's objectives. HR is often the mouthpiece of the organization, to at least employees. With that, it helps align the organization with the mission and provides the reason why employees would want to work for the organization. HR often takes the burden off of multiple processes, off of the shoulders of other people in other departments in the organization. They allow others to focus on their work intentionally. And finally, HR connects people to the strategy. HR often brings the connection between its people and the strategy as well as its mission, making success possible. Now let's get into the common HR challenges nonprofits are facing. Just like for-profit businesses, nonprofits are faced with common human resources challenges. Oftentimes, however, simple challenges for the for-profit world may be more difficult to overcome for its nonprofit counterparts. Why, you ask? There is often limited or inconsistent funding. This is of particular interest today when multiple not-for-profits are having grants and other funding pulled for a variety of reasons. Recruiting may also be a challenge for most employers, but recruiting hiring, and retaining talent is exponentially more difficult in the not for profit world. And we'll get into more details about that in a few slides. Many nonprofit organizations are late to the game, even when they have HR, and often are able to only staff one HR person for the whole organization. With that said, and without the extra time or support, it is almost impossible to keep up with the ever changing legal landscape. Even when not a not for profit is able to hire talent, it is often difficult for such talent to stay with the organization for long periods of time, never mind for their career. Talent burnout, lack of professional development opportunities, and little to no performance management fails to inspire these employees, which makes them look elsewhere. Managing a diverse workforce is quite challenging currently. There are up to 5 generations currently working together in the workforce, each of them with their own needs and way of working. This is often something that is not made a priority and therefore leads to roadblocks. We will dive deeper into each of these on the following slides. We'll start first with limited funding. In general, nonprofits often have limited financial resources. Many rely on donations and grants, and obviously, this affects the ability to be successful in key HR areas such as recruiting and retaining talent, managing the HR budget, paying competitive wages, and offering benefits. It also restricts the training budget, so often leading to fewer professional development opportunities for employees. The lack of budget also often requires the need for volunteers in order for the business to get through the day to day. There are ways to overcome the challenges of limited funding. Some of these include creative compensation packages. Instead of high salaries, nonprofit organizations can be creative with its non compensation offers, including flexible working hours, flexible work arrangements, including work from home options, extra vacation days, and opportunities for professional development. These perks can make jobs more attractive. Another way to overcome this challenge is to look to grant funding. Look for grants specifically aimed at HR development. They are out there. Some foundations provide funding for training and development specifically. Keep your eye out and you could possibly add to your funding. Volunteer programs. Using volunteers to fill gaps. Although this brings some of its own challenges, which we'll discuss in a couple slides, volunteers can bring in new skills and help reduce the workload on paid staff. There are challenges to doing this, but it does allow an employer to have greater numbers of workers to contribute to the cause and to get the work done. Finally, being creative about how to leverage the workforce also leads to more triumphs. Instead of hiring people who can only do one function or work in one department, try to leverage talent to work cross department, saving time and money. In addition to being creative with your organization's compensation, including offering benefits and providing development opportunities, all organizations, including nonprofit organizations, must remain compliant with pay laws. For example, pay transparency has become one of the biggest regulatory issues in the state of New York, both with employees as well as when recruiting. Employers should develop a pay scale for certain jobs, regardless of who you hire to work for in them. You should also consider experience, education, and other hiring criteria. Use objective data to defend pay for work in all jobs. So, what should you actually do? You absolutely need to pay men and women the same for any job that is consistent in job duties. And you should absolutely not ask candidates about salary history. These are two relatively recent rules in New York State, and they also occur in other states. So I would advise not to do anything regarding paying people differently based on their gender and asking about salary history. What you should do, however, is evaluate jobs for levels of skill, effort, and experience. Determine if employees can be assisted by volunteers. Determine when to cross-utilize talent and set wages to job roles for hiring. Be clear about what you're hiring for, too. That is always helpful when recruiting, especially for a nonprofit organization. Employee classification is key for all of these compensation issues as well. Know whether your employees are exempt versus non exempt and know the difference. Whether a role is considered exempt or non exempt depends on meeting certain pay and duties requirements under both federal and state law. Getting this classification wrong can cause an organization fines, penalties, and loss of benefits and employees, even the loss of business. Because nonprofits often pay lower compensation, be careful if you hire someone for a position that may have duties of an exempt position, but do not pay the minimum exempt salary amount, whether that be state or federal. For example, on January 1st, 2025, there's a new weekly minimum salary threshold for exempt employees in New York State. There are two different rates for upstate New York as well as Westchester County and New York City. Be aware of those exempt salary levels when hiring for positions that you are classifying as exempt. Timekeeping is also important for non-exempt hourly employees. Use of payroll applications or automation can help keep you in compliance in this area. Another area that is key is making sure your employees are taking meal breaks. One of the top areas audited by the New York State Department of Labor is meal breaks and time cards. All employees working a minimum of 6 hours, which extends across the noontime, what they consider lunch hour in the state of New York, must take an unpaid 30-minute meal break. There are other requirements for people who work extended hours over the dinner meal time that require additional breaks. All employees are required to take a lunch break, even exempt employees. Automated reporting via a human capital management system or time management system should show that lunch is being taken, which should be reviewed prior to processing payroll each pay period. Another area that's important to pay attention to compensation wise is pay frequency. That's another area frequently audited in New York State. It is important that employers pay their employees at the frequency required by state law. For example, New York State requires that manual workers be paid weekly, while most other employees are usually paid biweekly or semi monthly. Manual workers is a definition that's really hard to grasp, and there's very few guidelines, but basically refers to a mechanic, working man, or laborer according to New York State law. More specifically, if this employee spends more than 25% of her work time engaged in physical labor, they will be considered a manual worker. Differing pay rules for nonprofit organizations do exist, so you should be consulting those rules when designing your pay. Be sure you're paying minimum wage, which typically increases each year on December 31st. It is currently at $15.50 per hour in New York State, and there are some exceptions for certain service industries that include a tip credit. So I encourage you to research those and or consult with someone who can advise you on paying appropriately in that industry. Finally, do you know the difference between employee and independent contractor? You can't just call someone an independent contractor if they are under your direction, instruction, and our rules and policies. They are likely an employee. Behavioral control, which includes controlling work timing, location, etc., or financial control, how they are paid, how expenses are reimbursed, etc., and the relationship of the parties all go into determining whether someone's an employee or an independent contractor. In addition to the previous slide, and something more challenging for nonprofit organizations than most others, is being sure you can differentiate who is an employee versus who is a volunteer. Be careful to classify non-employees correctly. Be be careful not to pay any compensation to your volunteers. Volunteers cannot receive compensation. Do not provide any in-kind benefits. That would be considered compensation to volunteers and soon could lead to them being considered employees. Misclassification can lead to back pay, back taxes, and penalties. So I encourage you to be sure to utilize your volunteers in just that manner as volunteers, and be careful not to exude the control over them and or provide pay for them that you would regular employees. An organization is also not required to carry workers' comp insurance for volunteers in New York. However, if those volunteers end up being misclassified employees, the employer may be at risk for not providing that coverage to them. So, as you can see, that classification is as important as any of the others we discussed on the previous slide, especially to nonprofit organizations. The next challenge we're going to be discussing is recruiting and retention. Some say probably the most challenging for nonprofit organizations. In general, nonprofits often have limited financial resources, as we discussed earlier. Many rely on donations and grants. Obviously, this affects the ability to be successful in key HR areas such as recruiting and retaining talent, managing the HR budget, and paying competitive wages and offering benefits. It restricts the training budget and also leads to fewer professional development opportunities. Obviously, big budgets allow employers to have an easier time when they're recruiting or when they're posting for jobs. It's especially more difficult to recruit for executive directors and CFOs and other C-level leadership at nonprofit organizations. Although there may be a cost, executive recruiting and search may be the best option for nonprofit organizations, as it saves time and often finds talent that is aligned with mission and goals, especially for the senior executive positions. Lower pay does not help in attracting talent, that's quite obvious. Being Having the ability to provide increases on a more regular basis obviously also helps doesn't help alleviate employees wanting to leave due to not having regular increases in their pay, even if they have agreed to come on at a lower rate. And it is very cost effective to take moments to develop a recruiting and retention strategy. Talk about the things you can offer that may be different. Here are some solutions that are commonly used by nonprofit organizations to attract and retain talent in that manner. Mission driven recruitment. If you have a mission and your organization supports that mission, it's often advantageous to highlight the organization's mission and the difference employees can make. Many people are motivated by purpose, not just money. You can offer non compensation benefits as well. Communicating total compensation usually helps in the recruiting process. You can talk about what benefits you're providing, what the time off is like. Do you provide additional benefits for the whole family, like employee assistant plans or travel plans? And do you have events throughout the year to celebrate your employees, etc.? Career development opportunities are also a good way to recruit and retain talent. Offer opportunities for growth and development. Employees are more likely to stay if they see opportunities for growth. And then finally, a positive workplace culture and communicating that positive workplace culture really goes a long way. It creates a supportive and engaging work environment, and a positive culture can improve job satisfaction and retention. So let's move on to our third challenge in compliance. Now, this is not a special challenge for just nonprofit organizations. Compliance is a very difficult thing for most employers because they simply do not have the staff to do the research and to stay updated on state and federal laws that are often coming at them, daily, weekly, and monthly instead of just annually. So, compliance is an area that's difficult unless you have a subject matter expert or have an entire team prioritizing to keep up with the ever changing legal and compliance environment. It is important to remain updated on federal, state, and local compliance related updates throughout the year. It is something that happens all 12 months a year, not just at the end or the beginning of the year, and can affect how you manage your business and employees. With a slim HR team and fewer dedicated resources, this becomes even more challenging for nonprofit HR departments. With that said, the first compliance related item we highly recommend is updating your employee handbook throughout the year. and at least annually if you can't get to it more than that. It's often helpful to hold a training session each year as you unveil the updated handbook to discuss the new policies that employees typically get wrong, and how compliance affects the organization. If you need assistance with the handbook or reviewing policies to be sure they're compliant, you should find a trusted resource to assist. Another critical compliance item in New York State is sexual harassment training and policies. This training must be done annually and for new hires, and the new hire training is often missed. If you do not have the capacity to complete this internally, there are resources on the New York State Department of Labor website, including model training and notices. You can also reach out to an HR consultant or trainer. This area, as well as the employee handbook, are well worth the dollar, even with a small budget, to be sure you are in compliance. You must also be sure that you are compliant in the following other areas: pay transparency and pay equity, leave management, technology policies and the employer's ability to monitor employees, federal and state poster requirements, developing systems and procedures to follow policies created, and having go to resources to keep updated. Leave management, as we mentioned on the previous slide, is one of the most difficult tasks that an employer may undertake. Balancing the various federal and state leaves is often difficult and can have tremendous fallout if done incorrectly. Be sure to be updated on FMLA, and I know some of you are shaking your heads on FMLA because typically it applies to employers who are 50 employees or more. Some smaller employers are still required to provide FMLA depending on what industries you are in. So it's critical to keep that in mind when planning a management strategy. Other leaves, like New York State paid family leave, leave associated with disability or workers' compensation, are important to get a handle on, as well as how they all interact with each other, as well as your payroll. This is often considered drowning in alphabet soup. With all the letters associated with these leaves, it's hard to get them right. Please do not think because you're a small organization who may not qualify for some of these leaves that it is not as important. I encourage you to review some of these leaves and make sure that you are monitoring, tracking, and providing them appropriately for employees in your organization. We also recommend utilizing a leave tracking system or a team to assist in leave management so that you can remain compliant and take the burden off your overtaxed small HR teams. It assists with privacy laws related to medical leaves, tracking leave that runs concurrently, confirming return to work, and working directly with your carriers. Some of the more common leave issues in New York State include leaves running concurrently, coordinating payment with carriers, implications to both leave tracking as well as payroll, benefit protection, job protection, and the time it takes for these leaves and how much time an employee may have over the course of a 1 year period. On to our number 4 challenge, talent management. Much like any job, nonprofit work can be very demanding and stressful. Employees often work long hours and face emotional situations, leading to burnout and high turnover rates. Here are some solutions that are often implemented by nonprofit organizations to reduce employee burnout and high turnover rates. Providing a better work life balance goes a long way. Promote reasonable working hours and encourage regular breaks and vacations by developing employee friendly paid time off policies. Providing mental health support goes a long way as well. Provide that through an employee assistance plan or other counseling services or wellness initiatives. It really does go a long way. Recognition and rewards. Regularly recognize and reward employees for their hard work. Simple gestures of appreciation can boost morale and reduce burnout. One of the best ways to recognize employees for their hard work is through bonuses. Bonuses come in many forms, with the most common forms of bonuses being discretionary and non-discretionary bonuses. I know that we're talking about small budgets in some cases, but even a little bit goes a long way to ensure a successful employment relationship. Another one of our challenges is related to professional development. Again, overtaxed small HR departments aren't able to provide professional development. Also, a limited budget leads to fewer training opportunities or budgets to attend outside events. This leads to skill gaps and stagnation in the organization. In order to make this better and cut down on skill gaps, there are some solutions used by nonprofit organizations that really help develop and retain employees, including internal training programs. You can use the skills of current staff to train each other. Peer to peer learning is cost effective and beneficial. You can use free or low cost online courses and webinars. Many platforms offer high quality training. GTM, of course, like the one we're doing right now, offers a lot of webinars on some very important topics. Partnerships and networking go a long way as well. Partner with other nonprofits or local businesses to share training resources. Networking can open up collaborative learning opportunities. It may also get you some additional volunteers. Be sure to have a regular line of communication between managers and employees. Even if you don't have a formal performance management program, it's best to provide feedback, set goals, and provide opportunities to succeed in the organization. Providing upward mobility for employees will also help retain them for longer periods of time. Employee engagement is also always a priority. Often we work to engage the public, our customers, students, and the world, but forget about those who are helping to achieve our organization's goals and mission. Here are a few tips on making employees feel engaged and that they mean something to the organization. These efforts will keep interested in the past, present, and future of the organization and will assist in making change. First and foremost, train managers. They can be your best tool, whether it be through providing additional training, being a mentor to some of your newer employees, or even assisting with cross training. They are your best go to. So train them so that they're able to handle that extra work. Create an environment in which employees can share ideas and problems. Again, it's that collaboration and that sharing that not only provides information that other employees may need, but also makes everyone feel a part of a team. Do not limit discussion to annual evaluations and or discipline. You should have an ongoing dialogue and managers should have an ongoing dialogue with their direct reports. Let people know how they're doing, encourage them to succeed, encourage them to take on new and expanded projects. Examining processes and workflows very regularly also helps in this area. It is important, I think many employers have learned this over the last decade or so, that employees require us to embrace their family and work needs. We need to be flexible, so hearing employees out in this regard also helps employee engagement. And then, of course, recognizing talent, providing positive feedback, providing that feedback in a public forum, all of that goes a long way to make employees engaged and want to stay with an employer. We also encourage the use of engagement or culture surveys to really assess how employees are feeling about different things within the organization. It provides insight into what you're doing well and what you could use improvement on. It also lets you know what your employees need to remain at your organization. The next challenge is managing a diverse workforce. Nonprofits often serve diverse communities and need a workforce that reflects that diversity. Managing a diverse team requires special skills and understanding. Being able to manage a diverse workforce is an important skill for any organization to have. Here are some solutions nonprofit organizations can utilize when managing a diverse workforce. Having an inclusive recruitment process is the ultimate. Starting from the beginning of someone's recruitment and through their employment shows that you are really supporting a diverse workforce and that you're trying to gain talent that can do so. Develop recruitment strategies that reach diverse candidate pools and partner with minority serving organizations to use diverse job boards. Provide training to enhance employees' cultural competency and sensitivity. This improves workplace relationships and service delivery. Implement policies that promote inclusivity and equity. This includes flexible holidays, anti discrimination policies, and support for employees from diverse backgrounds. And again, remember that diversity doesn't only mean cultural diversity. Right now, we have 5 different generations working in the workforce together. All of them have different work styles. All of them have different work needs. All of them need different flexible arrangements in their workplace. So, considering generational diversity is also something that's quite important when establishing a workforce these days. So, don't forget about that when thinking about diversity. Some key points to remember. As we end this presentation, I want you to all remember the following. HR is critical in managing nonprofit organizations. HR is in charge of hiring, firing, training, and the well being of employees and volunteers. HR helps align the organization with the mission, and HR connects people to the strategy. Don't forget the important role you can make within your organization. But knowing the challenges and having the tools and resources to overcome those challenges is the most important. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Raleigh to discuss some questions and talk about some of our services.
Jen, thank you very much for cramming so much information into that short amount of time. We appreciate it. We hope you're up to the challenge for the questions coming up in just a moment. But first, we'd like to quickly mention an HR service from GTM that could really help meet the challenges that Jen was just talking about in her presentation. That service is an HR audit conducted by one of our certified HR consultants. An HR audit is a risk management and prevention tool. GTM has an audit that they conduct and review all of your human resources policies, practices, and systems to identify areas for improvement, ensuring compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. It's the objective to have an examination to identify and remedy possible exposure for your organization. We're going to fully access your HR processes and policies. Then findings from the HR audit can be remedied with the assistance of our team. With a GTM HR audit, you'll mitigate risks, improve efficiencies, ensure compliance, and enhance your organization's effectiveness. And now, Jen, if you're ready, we have some questions that have come in and we're going to pose them to you. Here is number one. What can HR professionals and recruiters help in the setting for hiring and retention?
I think the most important thing is to include in those job postings a lot of the intangible benefits that we've discussed, like flexibility, the organization's culture and mission, development opportunities if you're able to offer them. Additional benefits that you may be able to offer other than regular pay, I think highlighting that you have employee benefits like health insurance, dental and vision insurance, those things are very important. Again, some of that non compensation payment or benefit that you provide employees is often more important as or equally as employment as that regular pay. I think also highlighting things like robust PTO policies, offering flexible work arrangements if that works for your type of business, highlighting access to paid time off and employee benefits, and better work life balance, make the employer more attractive. So I think offering all of those in combination and then including those in your job postings, I think will bring in a lot more people than simply offering the job description and the pay rate. And of course, New York State now requires us to provide a pay rate range in all of our job postings. Sometimes that can turn people off seeing that alone. So when you offer the description of all that the job comes with, in addition to that pay rate, it will be help an employer be more attractive.
All right. Before we get to our next question, we've got a couple more coming through, but we have room for more, we believe. So please don't forget, you can click on that little question mark towards the upper right of your screen. Click on that, type in your question for Jen. Don't be shy. She'll be happy to answer, as she's going to answer question number 2. Do not profit organizations have obligations to their volunteers?
Well, we did touch on that a little bit in the presentation, but nonprofit organizations have to be careful not to provide benefits or pay to its volunteers, as it may make them more akin to employees, which would require the employer to then provide them some of the other benefits that they are providing to their paid employees. So, getting that classification right, first and foremost, is very, very important. Otherwise, it does create other obligations on behalf of the employer to the volunteer. Um, if you utilize volunteers in New York State, you are, however, required to provide them with sexual harassment training. This is an area that a lot of not for profits don't realize. And I know it's difficult to wrangle everyone, and sometimes some of our not for profits that use volunteers use different volunteers all the time. They are not regular by any means, which makes it difficult to provide continuous, ongoing sexual harassment training. Technically, under New York state law, we are required to provide that to our volunteers. I I think it's more reasonable to provide that to our more regular volunteers, but it would be a red flagged item if New York State did come in and do an audit. So I do just caution about that sexual harassment training, and do whatever makes sense for your organization. But please realize that New York State law technically does require that of our volunteers.
All right, thank you. Here's question number 3. Are there any other tips for recruiting employees specifically for the nonprofit world?
Well, I think, in addition to the first question that I answered, talking about some of those other benefits, I think it's important to lead with the organization's mission. Many people are specifically looking to become involved with a nonprofit organization, and it's those missions that are motivating them to do so. Many people are motivated by purpose and values and not just money. So it's important to include in your job posting as well information about the organization, maybe telling the story of the impact that employees can make. Leading with the mission often gains buy-in even before you discuss pay and other details about the job. And many people do lead with their heart, so letting them know what your organization is doing or what you're contributing to the community often helps with recruiting as well as retention, really.
Well, we know nonprofit organizations struggle with budgets and with staffing. So, what are some of the best ways to provide training or career development for nonprofit organizations when they do wrestle with low budgets and maybe even um, lower budgets and low staffing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to utilize the employees you do have currently. Um, Often assigning an internal mentor to employees really naturally kicks off that ongoing training that you may have. I find that using the talent you already have also, that even despite the fact that they're not HR professionals, often leads to just the right training needed for employees within the organization. Also offering cross training in different parts of the organization creates employees who are more dedicated. So, again, using what you have already to create training that you may not have already. And I think we mentioned that there's some other relatively low cost and efficient ways for providing online training, attending webinars like this one today. A lot of the professional organizations online offer free training as well, but making sure employees feel supported and that you are engaged in their improvement often helps. So anything you can provide is helpful, more importantly, with regard to retention once they're in your organization.
Well, when someone volunteers for a board, they're volunteering. Not everybody knows all the right answers or the right ways to kind of find their way as an organization. What's the role of a board in a nonprofit organization? What's the relation to the HR matters out there?
Boards of directors for nonprofit organizations often try to be very involved with the organization, which is great for its mission and its direction. Um, Typically, however, their only official role should be to hire, manage, and direct the executive director, and be there as a sounding board for the executive director or the senior leadership. Um, Usually, any other direct contact with other staff members or employees is usually problematic. And I understand, most people that are on boards for nonprofit organizations are extremely passionate about the organization. So often do try to get more involved, but it can become problematic, especially for those that do not have an HR background and they're starting to get involved with employment related matters. So encourage people to join boards and be there for their executive director, but all to limit their exposure to a lot of the day to day as well as employee related matters.
Jen, thank you very much for sharing your expertise today. That's all the time we have for questions. We thank you very much for your presentation and your attention to all the detail. If any of our attendees have additional questions or questions about specifically meeting HR challenges as a not-for-profit organization, feel free to contact Jen directly. And if you're interested in learning more about GTM's HR services, including an HR audit, contact Quito Delgado, and you can see their contact information right there on the screen. Thanks so much for all of you joining us today. And be sure to look for that email later today with a link to a recording of today's presentation. We'll also have a PDF version of today's presentation. So you have a great rest of the day. Look for that email. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.